Rock the wind in the clear day's dawn, blaas the kluts heel sterk uit die oude bay. But there's meer nor a rock wind blowing through the great glen of the world today.
As a local minister, I have buried lots of lovely people, lovely, faithful, wise people, who not only long to visit somewhere special or do something beautiful, but they did have the time and even the money to do so, if they had got round to it. This must be the snow line. I've been looking up at Ben Lomond for getting on for 30 years. Missed opportunity always has something tragic about it, though. With Easter now growing so close, Easter allows us to inhabit the sort of spiritual tipping point when fulfillment of longings and prophecy can come together. So we don't have to bury any more species, nor commit any friends' homelands to the waves, nor stand back as a village is cremated, whether next door or across the sea. And I wish this were just poetry, but you know, none of those things are made up. And that's scary. There's the things you long to do, but there's also doing them in time to do some good. But like those good green things we all long to do, we also need to respect creation, the power of the weather, the steepness of the path, and more. But when prophecy is fulfilled and made real, and you have to take scripture seriously, well, that is the sort of thing that nearly got Jesus thrown over a cliff in his hometown. How dare we suggest that cherished visions and a spiritual response to the threats of the past might actually be recycled and repurposed with power for today? What gets you up out of the pew to praise or to punish, to protest, or indeed to pay homage? Is it the cross that will shift you? Is it a great love for the earth spilling over into your church and community as Mary's great love for Jesus filled the whole house with that delightful fragrance? Is it the empty tomb? Is it the wildfires and the storms that we've heard of? Is it the butterfly? Is it the green blade rising? Is it the frog spawn that I've just passed on the way up the hill? But if none of these things steer your life's course in a still greener direction, what help do you need to get there? Or what do you need, or who do you need to get there with? Go easy, be kind. And remember that Jesus himself needed the support of fools like Mary to face what lay ahead. And Isaiah's people in exile needed something more dangerous than the tedium of mere survival. So we got them looking back on the good old days when God did stand up to violence and abuse, but he recycled it, repurposed it, reshaped it. Now, I can't look down on anyone. I'm still piling things up for a rainy day, though I can see it's pouring. Just as houses are being built in Scotland up to 2024 with fossil fuel heating systems, brand new houses. And I know that this is because years ago, before our awareness of the extremely urgent climate crisis, gas really was cleaner and more economical than what came before, and good people, faithful people, wise people exhausted themselves with battles in committees and boardrooms, even to make such limited progress. Like the ridiculously draining, long-winded process of convincing ourselves in the churches that it really was Jesus who said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And this pretty obviously applies to the investments that we'd been relying on in fossil fuel companies. That's with or without economic pressure, as investors and even banks are increasingly questioning the long-term viability of the entire sector. That's including the spectacle of how ready those companies are to cut jobs following market forces, with or without the support of church funds. The poor will always be with us, just so long as we do nothing to unsettle the injustice that keeps the poor poor, just so long as we don't rock the boat that inevitably makes things worse through avoidable climate damage. The poor will always be with us, and jobs will always be at risk, and far more so unless we encourage our timorous leaders and wholeheartedly into that adventure of a fully just new exodus from a money economy of fossil fuels to a low carbon welfare economy, that promised land, which will turn out as it will, but it's got to be better than where we are now. But we know it takes far more than facts to change minds. It takes more than sticking plaster to stop the abuse of the earth. Scripture, says Jesus, should be enough. And in Lent we hope that a cross and an empty tomb will be enough. But will you let it be enough for you to change? And many of you do know how good it feels, how liberating to be convinced you have permission to move out of a corner you'd boxed yourselves into, or look around your own congregation or our movement, Eco Congregation Scotland, and you'll certainly find someone who is there and involved because of that Moses moment, the blazing bush on the brink of destruction, which says what you do now makes a difference. That the heady foolishness of the devotional extravagance shown by Mary, or maybe by you, can make a difference, can give light and fragrance to our common home. Now, John, writing, hedges their bets by reporting that it is Judas, the thief, who puts the sensible point of view that coal, oil and nuclear weapons bring jobs, that we can't afford to change, and that the reserves and treasures we do have must be squandered on business as usual or kept on the shelf. That fantasy of business as usual. But you don't need to be a thief or a betrayer to be shackled by common sense no longer fit for purpose. It happens to good, wise, faithful people too. COVID has shown us in a relatively acute crisis how much we can change and how fast. And those few days of clear water, clean air, birdsong you could hear in city streets, those have become like scripture, reminding us that change might not be all bad. I thank God for the memory of the fragrance of the flowers, which I first noticed in short walks of lockdown. That and so much about nature to which I've been oblivious in a far too sensible lifetime. But global greenhouse gas emissions bounce back long before any all clear on the virus. And whatever they said at COP, coal producers are planning and breaking production targets for that dirtiest fuel, even as the leaders of the nations made promises to the opposite effect. As acute comes and goes, the chronic crisis of joined-up disasters demands a different sort of responsiveness for churches. Something like a declaration of emergency to free us from the wisdom of the inertia, which I don't mind admitting probably served us really well for a while. And for now, and this year, churches I know of and love, and with whom I have great sympathies, are still replacing gas boilers with gas boilers. And yes, alternatives at present may have a greater upfront monetary cost. But as the hike in gas prices pushing so many into fuel poverty makes clear, that's not investment in the future. At least not in any likely future, rather than a boring, despairing fantasy of business as usual. But even if churches don't feel they can responsibly sow seeds of hope or follow Jeremiah's example of buying land in a recession, then both of the readings today, as part of our preparation to reap the greatest harvest through the emotional turmoil that comes with praying through crucifixion and resurrection, these two readings are heaven sent. But what we can see is the extravagant outrageousness of both as God-given spiritual resources for the hardest of times. Sudden or continual, God is with us through both. As Eco-Chaplain for Scotland as a whole, and for what was always going to be a limited time, I strive to be present to congregations throughout the nation. Though of course that has implications for my carbon footprint. As Judas would say, as no doubt he'd say about the entirety of COP, it costs the earth to be involved in the healing of the earth. I do plant a tree for each of the films like this, but I know that will not offset it. But grasping the nettle and stepping outside the daily round, is it so terrifying? Is it something which somehow has to be classified as a guilty pleasure, something you are not going to get round to? After all, well-brought-up Christians are shy of being seen to be extravagant, aren't they? But a sense of urgency really does transform and repurpose our priorities. Enjoy yourself now. It's later than you think. I think the words "praise the Lord" would be in order, but I hope it helps you. I've looked at Ben Lomond since first I came to Scotland in the late 80s. This is the first, maybe the last time I have the chance to get right the way up this very popular mountain. Though this early in the year I've had to watch my step with the weather, the wind and the spirit both blow where they will. Getting out and about and letting the landscape take the lead in the preaching is a luxury. I won't say I don't enjoy it, rather more than something less costly like sitting at my desk with a webcam. But like any mountain of height, the reward is a different perspective, an insight into the layout of the land way beyond what maps can offer, along with an increased awareness of the respect that is due the earth. And the hearing which is due the Earth's interpreters, the scientists and their immediate partners, the indigenous peoples from the North Pole to the South, custodians of almost all the biodiversity on which we're belatedly discovering we completely depend. All the more as day by day, as even more bad news about the planet trickles into my inbox, and I realise I'm probably not close to taking in and digesting quite how bad things are and might be, and how little it seems I can do about it. Or put another way, of what value is the little I can do? Before concluding, a wee note about the book of Isaiah. The majority of scholars support the idea that, as it were, Isaiah is a job rather than just one person. Several writers were involved over several lifetimes, and the one writing for us today is dealing with people who are downhearted, despondent, perhaps despairing, thinking they can do nothing. And what does this Isaiah do? Well, confronted with despair, they recycle the sacrosanct good old days, the story of Exodus. God in partnership with those waters, completely eradicating the threat of the world-beating Egyptian army, demonstrating how even empires are not in control, not sovereign over God's creation on which they rather depend, at whose mercy they remain. Our fellow creatures can see it, the wildest of them all, the jackal, the ostrich, the ravens here on the mountain. Trust in an impossibility who can still offer the hand of friendship. Climate change will always be with us, but when's a better time to respond than today? And when are we going to take notice?